Hello, today I'm going to be showing you how I draw grass and seed heads using coloured pencils. So to start off, I just put in the lighter areas using some light yellow. I'm simply just sketching in loose lines, just keeping them sort of curved rather than straight. You don't want straight grass. And the purple marks I put in are for some flowers. These particular ones are called Salvation Jane, which are common near where I live, and they make a beautiful display on the hillsides when they're in flower. So I'm using some darker greens now, some olive greens and pine green as well, and just sketched in where some of the darker shadows go before blending it out using odorless solvent. And I'm just using that on a size 8 brush, which you do have to be careful not to have too much of the solvent on the brush when you do that, because it can drench the paper and can make the ruin the teeth of the paper. And then after I've done that, I'm going over again with my different greens, my olive greens, and a little bit of black I used as well, just to darken up those lines before blending it out again. And I did have to let the solvent dry before doing that next layer of colour. Now what I'm doing here is I've got titanium white powder from brush and pencil, and I've mixed it with a little bit of their touch-up texture, and I'm using a liner brush just to paint it on. And at this point, this is actually the first piece that I've had with the titanium white. So I'm just testing it out and seeing how I go with it. I'm quite excited to be able to try it out, and I'm just brushing in the different grass lines, as well as I put a bit on those purple flowers because they got a bit too dark for what I want, and then putting in little dots for the seed heads as well. Now here I'm going over it with light yellow, and as you can see, colour goes over the white, titanium white, really well. You can just tint it, so if you've gone too dark in an area, it is really great for just painting that on, just thin layer, and then being able to go over it in colour. And see how well I've been able to make those purple flowers stand out with the different purples, the pinks and the purples on top of the titanium white. Added a little bit of brown there because I don't want it completely green in there. I do want it to look like a dry, summery type look, not too lush from spring. And coming back over with a little bit more of the titanium white and just putting lots of little dots in everywhere, and just making it look like little grass heads are everywhere. Notice the ones further in the distance, I did do a lot more little dots rather than sort of clumps of dots, because otherwise you want the look of the grass heads in the distance, not if you make them too large, they'll just look like they're in the foreground and not sort of going into the distance. I found doing the grass this way using the titanium white, it's quite different to my usual approach to drawing grass, where you start with the light colour and you keep the lightest areas light. You don't go over with the shadows, and so you're going around all the light areas with the darker colours, which is a lot more time consuming. I found being able to just get the green colour down and then go over the top with the titanium white made it so much quicker and so much easier to get that effect of grass without spending the time going around every single clump and getting the shadows in and making sure you leave the light areas light. So much easier. I'm loving this stuff already. I can't wait to test it out on other projects. For the road, I've just been doing some light layers of grey, various shades, and keeping my marks for the most part horizontal, so that if there's any pencil marks that do end up showing, they're horizontal, which gives the effect of the road going off into the distance. You've got to be careful not to get pencil strokes going in the opposite direction, because that'll mess up that effect. And same when I'm blending, I tend to try and blend in horizontal lines so that any of those marks do come across as horizontal. And with perspective for sort of on the road, you want the horizontal marks, if you're showing any, to be closer together in the distance and further apart the closer to the front. I'm just adding in a little bit of texture along the edge of the road. Not doing too much, because I actually decided not to have too much texture on the road and have the focus more on the grass on either side of the road rather than the road itself. And here onto the second part of the grass, and just sketching in, putting a base layer of colour down. And I did this side a little bit different. I had actually had a couple-month break in between doing each side of the grass, so I wasn't entirely sure what I'd done on the other side. So I was just going along as I usually do and just drawing. I'm pretty excited to be back after my long break from my artwork, and happy to be bringing tutorials to you guys again. And doing this bush similar to how I'd done the bushes on the other side in part 2 of these tutorials about the road to Rapper Bay. And what I've done is just base colour and then gone over with little tiny strokes with the pencil, keeping them short to get the effect of the leaves and keeping the leaves in clumps. And just sketched in where I want the fence to go with the brown, and then bringing in the grass, filling in the grass spots in between. Adding a few more layers on the flowers and the grass, and then blending that out. Making sure I don't take the green, blend the green over the purple, because that can make it a little bit muddy if you do that too much. You do have to be a bit careful where you blend colour so that you don't cover up the lighter areas. As you can see, I'm doing this a bit different to how I did the first side and taking a bit longer. The other side had a lot less layers. Now getting the grass strokes in using the pencil, the darker green, and putting a little bit of brown into so it's not too green. I'm just making sure I make it look like there's a lot of grass clumps, not necessarily every individual strand, but you just want the clumps of grass. So you've got the shadow, groups of shadow in together. And then just blending that all out. Adding a bit more colour and a bit more yellow into those yellow spots, because sometimes when you blend you lose some of the colour, the intensity of the colour, so you need to go over it again. Just building up those layers. And now I'm finally coming over with the white titanium white. Now, probably should have done that a little bit sooner. I would have saved myself some time rather than building up quite so many layers. It's all a learning process and figuring out how I want it to look compared to which method you use. So just sketching in the little grass heads and the little dots on the flowers to make it look sort of like more like petals. And this stuff is great. You can just colour over the top of it to tint it so it's not white. So you can just brighten up that whole area. See how much that's lightened that area. So when you are planning on using this, do be aware that you may need to make the area darker than what you're intending, because it will lighten it a lot, depending on how much you use of it. Adding a bit more colour in, and then finishing off the road. I'm just going over with a bit of black and brown, just getting those lines, those horizontal lines, to give that effect of the texture on the road. And as you can see, I waited for that to dry before going on over it again and adding a bit more texture on the road. There you go. That's how I created the grass for this piece. And if you're keen to see how I created the clouds or the back blurry hills, I do have tutorials for those sections as well. I also have a 1-hour version of this over on Patreon. So if you're keen to see that, head over to that. The link's in the description below. Thank you for watching.